Seoul in late autumn carried a kind of quiet sadness. The kind that drifted between the yellow leaves and the soft afternoon light. On a small road in Yeonnam-dong, a familiar figure walked slowly with his head lowered, blending into the calm scenery as if he hoped no one would recognize him. Song Joong-ki, once known for a smile warm enough to brighten an entire screen. Like someone learning how to breathe again. After his highly publicized divorce from Song Hye-kyo, the world saw only the surface, the calm face, the polite nods, the measured steps. But behind those gentle gestures was a man carrying a silence heavy enough to break him. He spoke nothing of his pain. Not to the press. Not to fans, not to colleagues. His silence looked graceful, almost admirable. But it held a loneliness that the public never saw. When people asked, "Are you doing okay?" they meant well. But that simple question shook something inside him. It reminded him that he wasn't okay at all. In the early months after the divorce, he all but disappeared from public life. Fans believed he was healing quietly, taking time away for self-care. But the truth was far more fragile. In his apartment, the spaces where memories used to live became unbearable. There were corners he could not look at without feeling his chest tighten. He removed photographs, folded them carefully, and put them in a box he hid in the back of a closet he avoided opening. Some nights he stared at the ceiling for hours, unable to decide whether turning off the lights would make him feel worse or better. Nights were the hardest. Darkness made every sound louder, every memory sharper. The TV stayed on not for entertainment, but because he needed noise to drown out his thoughts. Many nights, he drove around Seoul long past midnight, circling aimlessly just to avoid going home. One evening, he sat outside his own front door for almost half an hour, unable to find the courage to enter the space that felt more like a museum of what his life used to be. What no one knew, what shocked even those closest to him, was that Joong-ki once wrote a handwritten letter to his agency asking to suspend all activities for 2 years. He wasn't angry or rebellious. He simply wrote, "Don't have enough emotion left to stand in front of a camera." His agency never released this letter. They feared how deeply it would shake the industry, how much it would reveal about the state he was in. But the letter was real, and it was proof of how close he came to walking away from acting entirely. Surprisingly, the person he confided in the most during that time wasn't a best friend or a family member. It wasn't a manager or a colleague. It was an older screenwriter who had worked with him almost a decade earlier. She remembered him not as a superstar, but as a sensitive actor who felt everything too deeply. When they met at a quiet cafe in Samcheongdong, he barely spoke for the first 20 minutes. Didn't rush him, didn't pry, didn't ask the questions others asked. She simply waited. Eventually, his voice came out thin and cracked. Someone forcing words through a fractured heart. She took his hand and told him something he would remember for the rest of his life. "If you give up acting because of this pain, you will be shutting the only door that could help you heal." His words stopped him from submitting the letter that day. He then built a new routine. Fragile but necessary. Every morning, he walked to a tiny cafe in Hanam-dong where the owner recognized him but never asked anything. They would place a warm cup of Americano on the table with the same quiet understanding. "Sit here as long as you want. You don't have to talk." Some mornings he simply stared at the rising steam, trying to feel something, anything, through the numbness. To ground himself, he began writing in a private journal. Not to reflect or analyze, but to survive. Pages with words like tired, uncertain, lost. Sometimes writing the same sentence repeatedly as if repetition might empty the pain from his chest. On one entry, he wrote, "I don't know how to live the next day." His handwriting was uneven, almost trembling. In the darkest period, he started jogging at night to avoid paparazzi and fans. Even that didn't always help. Once, running until his legs felt weak, he stopped by a bench near the Han River. The city lights reflected on the water like broken shards of gold. He stared at them and whispered into the cold air. Start again. The river, quiet and indifferent, offered no answer. There was a specific night he never spoke about, the night something inside him truly broke. He had accidentally come across an old scene from a drama he once filmed with Song Hye-kyo. The moment their faces appeared on screen, he froze. He didn't even manage to change the channel. He simply sat there, eyes wide, heart collapsing. The scene ended. He found himself crying without sound. The kind of crying that empties the person more than it relieves them. At 2 a.m., he called his manager but didn't explain anything. He only said, "I'm exhausted," and hung up. He avoided scripts for months. The weight of a single page felt heavier than he could manage. He once cancelled a script reading because the male lead's name shared a similar sound to a name from his past. A coincidence trivial to others but devastating to him. Yet even in his pain, life had small, expected moments of warmth. One winter afternoon, he found a stray puppy trembling near the entrance of his building. He brought it inside without hesitation. The puppy slept curled up against him that night. And for the first time in weeks, his breathing felt steadier. No one, not fans, not reporters, knew he adopted a dog during those lonely months. As time passed, he found himself opening the script for Vincenzo again. Almost without meaning to. Read the lines slowly at first. Then with growing intensity. Something about this character, a man rebuilding himself through chaos, spoke directly to his wounded heart. His first day returning to the studio. He stood outside the entrance, hands trembling. Inhaled deeply as if trying to borrow strength from the air around him. When he finally stepped inside. The hum of the set. The familiar weight of the lights. The low chatter of the staff, everything felt like a place he had once abandoned but finally rediscovered. He wasn't fully healed. Not even close. As he walked under the lights again, there was a sense of something shifting inside him. A small, fragile flame beginning to glow through the cracks. That was where his story of quiet struggle and silent rebirth truly began. Spring came quietly to Seoul. Not with bright colors or warm breezes, but with a softness that felt like forgiveness. When Joong-ki stepped onto his first set after months of silence, he carried the weight of both fear and hope. Studio lights were almost too bright, too overwhelming. But he forced himself to take steady breaths. He wasn't the same man he had been before the divorce. His eyes had changed, deeper, quieter. As if they held a world of emotions he wasn't ready to put into words yet. But stepping onto the set made him realize something important. He had survived. The crew greeted him gently. Not with the usual excitement reserved for A-list stars. With a kind of careful warmth. Someone placed a hand on his shoulder. Someone else handed him a warm drink. These small gestures, almost invisible to anyone watching from the outside, helped him feel anchored again. First time in a long time, he felt like he belonged somewhere. What fans never knew was how much Vincenzo meant to him, not as a project, but as a lifeline. The pain, the anger, the loneliness of the character mirrored his own so perfectly that sometimes he wondered if fate had handed him a role meant to pull him out of the dark. During one emotional scene, a line about betrayal hit him too hard. His voice cracked. The director noticed the tremble in his hands and called for a break. Joong-ki stepped aside, leaning against a wall, eyes closed. He wasn't acting anymore, he was simply trying to breathe through memories that surged like waves. Later, he would admit privately that he didn't know whether the tears in that scene were the character's or his own. He created new bonds quietly. A stylist he'd known for years once scolded him with teary eyes for losing too much weight. A cameraman slipped him vitamin supplements during breaks. These small, intimate moments of concern built a circle of comfort around him, one he never expected but desperately needed. He also allowed himself moments of solitude that were no longer rooted in pain but in healing. One evening, after finishing a long day of filming, he drove to the Han River, sat on the hood of his car, watched the city lights ripple across the water. He didn't cry that night. He didn't tremble. He just breathed. And for the first time in nearly a year, breathing didn't hurt. He traveled alone to Jeju during one short break between shoots. He rented a small wooden cabin near the shoreline. The wind smelled like salt and wild grass. There, he cooked simple meals, walked barefoot on the cold sand, and wrote 5 pages of memories he had been too afraid to revisit. He didn't write with anger or regret, only acceptance. When he returned to Seoul, his friends told him he looked lighter. The greatest secret he carried, perhaps the one no one around him fully knew, was that he had been working on a private manuscript, a small book of thoughts, feelings, regrets, and fragile hopes. It wasn't meant for publication. It wasn't meant for the world. Simply the story of a man learning to live again. A story only he could write. And in those quiet pages, without cameras or scripts, he processed what it meant to lose someone he once built a future with. He stayed silent for so long not because he wanted to protect himself, but because he wanted to protect her. That if he spoke even a little, narratives would twist, blame would spread, and wounds, both his and hers, would deepen. Silence was his last act of respect. Final offering. And yet, silence was also what nearly broke him. It was during the final interviews for a project that he finally realized he was ready to speak, not to explain, not to justify, but to be honest for the first time. The cameras rolled. He sat with hands clasped together, exhaled slowly, and let the truth rise. His voice was soft, steady, but tinged with vulnerability that made the room fall completely silent. He said he had struggled quietly. Some days felt unbearably heavy. That learning how to live alone again was harder than he ever imagined. He didn't blame anyone. He didn't focus on the past. He simply allowed the world to see the man behind the actor, the one who had been hurting yet trying every day to move forward. And when he admitted, "I continued living not because I was strong, but because I learned to accept my pain," staff behind the camera felt their eyes sting. The interview spread instantly. Fans were stunned. Some cried reading his words. Others apologized for assuming he had recovered easily. For the first time, they saw more than the polished star. They saw the human being who had fought a silent battle with himself. Later that night, Joong-ki walked along a quiet path above the Han River, the city glowing gently beneath the dusk sky. His hands were in his pockets. His steps slower, calmer. He touched his hair softly, as if acknowledging the new chapter he had stepped into. He paused at the railing, watching the water move, never still, always finding its way. He wasn't looking back anymore. He wasn't searching for what he had lost. He was learning how to carry his past without letting it weigh him down. In that quiet moment, surrounded by the hum of the city and the faint scent of spring, he finally felt something he had been longing for all along. And though the world would continue asking and speculating, he knew now that the person he was becoming mattered more than the person he had been. His story wasn't about tragedy, divorce, or shadows. It was about a man who walked through pain and found the courage to start again.